If you give this ballpark number and then let that thing evolve and eventually get to the point where it's like, oh, it is 2x, you're going to have a disgruntled client. They're not going to be happy with the fact that I didn't know I was designing something more expensive. And you might say, how could you not know? Guys, these clients don't know. Guys, today we're going to talk about ballpark pricing. Everyone talks about ballpark pricing, why it's the worst thing. We're going to talk about when you're anchoring this, how it emotionally impacts your client, how clients might not be price shopping, and instead they actually might be just trying to get to a decision whether or not the project makes sense or not. So ballpark pricing can feel like a negative thing in our industry. A lot of people advised against it, but we're going to talk about how you can actually do it accurately and be a good steward to the project, be a good steward to your client, and be a good steward to your business, meaning that you're doing it in a way that does not hurt the process. So let's get into it. Guys, this podcast is brought to you by Harnish Workwear. I'm just going to riff on Harnish just for a minute. This is totally off script. I have their pants. I have their sweatshirts. Every Modern Craftsman t-shirt, every NS Builders t-shirt, everything is all Harnish. I partnered with Harnish years ago. Kyle and Alex have been great and have been really this arm of our business to make sure that all of my team has the best workwear. The sweatshirts are super comfortable. They're super warm. The t-shirts are frankly the best fitting t-shirt I've ever worn. I have blank ones that I wear when I don't want to be branded, but usually I'm in a branded t-shirt. And they're super easy to work with, where I can just give them our brand content and they get the t-shirts in production immediately. Same thing with sweatshirts. But the pants, man, like the pants are so, number one, they're super comfortable, but they're super, super warm. I'm not in the field as much as I usually, or I was once. But I find myself wearing them any day it's cold out that I might be on a job site. And then on the weekends when my kids are playing hockey, I'm at the rink. Those rinks are freezing cold sometimes, and sitting in, athleisure on a steel or aluminum bench is not the warmest thing to be doing. So I usually throw my Harnish Crater 1 pants on and keep my legs warm. So big shout out to the guys at Harnish. If you guys are looking to up your workwear, start with their t-shirts. It's the H Label program. They'll get you and your crew fitted out with custom t-shirts. And then I would give the sweatshirt and pant combo a chance. Harnishworkwear.com. Make sure you check it out. Hey, before we get into the podcast, big favor, head over to moderncraftsman.co, sign up for our newsletter. Every week, we're sharing more tactical information. Obviously, you guys are listening to the podcast and you're getting a ton of information out of it, but we're getting more tactical and even sharing some of the documents, the templates, the processes that I implement in my business. A lot of that stuff is what I'm working on currently. It's what I'm improving my business with on a weekly basis. So if we can be helpful, we want to be to the fullest extent. And a lot of that is showing up in your inbox. And for all the educational content, for pre-construction, for lead generation, for anything regarding the way that we run our business, we're putting together more and more information on a weekly basis. And the only way to get access to that is to be part of the newsletter. Completely free, moderncraftsman.co. And then click the sign up for newsletter and make sure that you're signed up so you're getting all of these exclusive offers.
I like the countdown. Gets me all jacked up. Speaking of countdowns, we just had a new year. How's your 2026?
It's good. How's yours?
Feels the same as 2025.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie.
I do like taking, this year was 2 full weeks off. Nice to just like reflect and think, kind of like just have a thinking day about what you want to do. But I feel like you come back to work on Monday and it's just like, you get kicked right in the shin immediately. And it's like, all right, back in the grind. And, it's from, at least for me, it's how do I, all the stuff that I thought about, like, all right, if that's stuff that I want to focus on this year, how do I make sure that that becomes a priority over the stuff that just like hits you in the face every day?
Yeah, I think you got to try and find a balance between those two things, which starting back up proves to be more difficult than anything because I have a master list of what needs to be done, and then I'm juggling that with everything else that pops into my head that I've just put off for the past 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems as though you're not making any sort of progress whatsoever. I know I am.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem that way.
Yeah. I was saying to Julian yesterday, I'm like, it feels like, everything's in just like a really good spot, which in many ways it is. But that feeling was really just because no one was doing anything. Like no one, like there was no bills being paid and no people asking to be paid.
Yeah.
Like it was just like completely, everything just froze for 2 weeks.
It's like my business all year long. Oh man, that's funny. Yeah, so I turned 40 over the break.
Dude,
that's pretty sick.
You and Ken, which is crazy.
But 40 was a tough one leading up to it. I was very apprehensive about turning 40, and then you'd think I'd learn.
I didn't know that. Why?
I just think it's like a big birthday. 40's a big one. Like I can recall my parents turning 40 and getting over the hill cartoons and gag gifts and everything else. And I think leading up to 40 seemed like a big one. And you'd think I'd know this by having 40 birthdays at this point. But when you turn the next year older, nothing actually changes and you don't feel any different.
Like you're looking down the hill now. It's like, shit.
Yeah. But I don't know. I guess I was apprehensive about just 40 in general, but you don't really have much time to think that much about it. So.
You feel good about it now?
I feel good about it. I feel better. Relatively speaking, I feel good physically. I think I probably feel the same, if not better than 30, but I think mentally I'm in much better shape than when I turned 30. I think just the point of life that I'm in, confidence, self-esteem, where my life is, where my business is, just being way more secure. I feel much better turning 40 than 30. 30 was, I feel like 30, I had Tilly when we were 30. Selby was born, still trying to figure it all out. Not that I have it all figured out now, but 30 was, I feel like, a shit show.
Yeah.
Like a lot, but I don't know, I feel good. 40. It's the new 20.
Wait, am I going to be... How old?
I don't know how. I think you're going to be 38.
Yeah, I'll be 38. I was going to say 37, but I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, 88. Yeah. So I'll be 38 next month.
Getting close.
Yeah. So I got 2 years to figure my shit out, I guess.
Yeah. Then you'll be set. So we have a bit of a new plan that Dave is helping us unroll or unveil for the new year, looking to tackle some specific topics, somewhat have quarterly themes, at least keep things moving in a consistent direction. So our first podcast of the new year, other than talking about how I turned 40 and how jumping back into things is a bit of a shit show, is on ballpark pricing, how we use ballpark pricing. And I think that almost all of us at one point or another, have been burned by ballpark pricing. And I think that at the end of the day, you're trying to be helpful, that client's asking for a rough number, and before you know it, that number becomes the benchmark for the entire job. So I want to take some time today and break down how we talk about those cost ranges in a way that's going to protect you and sets better expectations and leads to better projects, not awkward conversations later. And I've learned in my 40 years, not that I've been in business 40 years, but that the success of every job that I have is based on the expectation that's set forth from the outset, generally with regard to budget, scope, and schedule, and then how I manage that on the back end. So it does start with ballpark pricing, and I know for years that you want to throw a number out there that's going to get you in the door and get your clients excited. But I've just learned over the years that you have to be really careful doing that. And I think that most clients want ballpark pricing. They want to understand where they stand, what something's going to cost, what different builders cost. But you have to understand that it's not just about sweetheart pricing. It's about creating a realistic expectation that's going to set you up to create a realistic budget that you can put in place for that job.
I made a face when you said if you if you haven't been burned. Everyone's been burned by this.
Yeah.
Like if you haven't, then you're lying to yourself. But I love this conversation because I think that through the decade plus that I've been in business, I have made many mistakes around ballpark pricing from the outset, from super specific line items. Like notoriously for a long time when I was estimating projects, I don't know why, but I would estimate electrical lines. Like when I was like early pricing things, I would always be 50% of what it came in at. So I just finally started like whatever my head said, it's like, oh, it's 50 grand for electrical. I'm like, it's 100.
Yeah.
So I just started doubling it when I was doing early pricing. But I find ballpark pricing to be an interesting topic because on one hand, it can burn a project. You're setting really poor expectations up front. On the other hand, it's really helpful to get a client aligned early. And so the whole the whole premise of this is like, how do you do this? How do you do this correctly? How do you get a client to understand what something's going to cost? Because ultimately, like you role play this, right? Like someone's calling you, they want to just get this idea of like what it's going to cost, and you're trying to give them as much information so they feel reasonably confident in order to continue the conversation. And flip side, where it's like, I want to understand, what's your budget? Oh, I don't have a budget. It's like, well, what's your ballpark? Like, what do you want to spend?
Yeah.
And because ultimately I need to understand, are you aligned with what we typically do? And it's funny because part of going back to 2026 and like thinking about what we're changing this year is we've decided that, or I guess I've decided that I'm going to be more transparent with our cost structure when someone reaches out, and just almost just like be really unapologetically like straightforward with, it's not going to cost any less than this amount of money. And the whole purpose of that is so people can look at and self-qualify. Because I can't even tell you how many people reach out to us that have no understanding of what stuff costs, and when I communicate, they're like, it's almost as though I'm insulting them. I'm like, I gotta get it. I gotta get that out in the stratosphere now. So when you're reaching out to us, it's like, I know these guys are going to be, $1,000 a square foot, so if my head's not even around that number, then it's pointless for me to reach out.
And I think that a lot of times we feel that ballpark, especially early on, that ballpark pricing is our enemy. And I think that as contractors, as business owners, it can be, but I think that you have to realize and understand what a client's trying to do. You have to reframe that conversation, drop your guard and understand what they're trying to do. Like, what are clients trying to do? At the end of the day, you can really use it to your advantage to help your clients qualify, to understand who's a fit for you and your business. And clients are trying to do the same thing as you are. Oftentimes, they don't know how much something costs. They're trying to manage the risk on a job. They're looking at comparing multiple options for a contractor. They're not looking to waste your time. They're just trying to gather information as quickly as possible. And I think that once you understand that and you reframe the entire ballpark or budget conversation, for me, it helps me vet my clients. It helps set the tone for the project. You just, again, have to make sure that your ballpark pricing process or system sets you up for success. And I think that's where most people screw up, or where ballpark pricing can go wrong. I've
Yeah.
also developed, for some reason in the past year, this weird whistle when I say S's that I've noticed on the podcast, and I don't know how to stop it.
I've never noticed.
Yeah, it's like,
Your
remember we were talking about
your
this, like
whistle.
the beaver from Lady and the Tramp.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Sorry, I just heard myself whistle when I was
That must
talking.
drive you nuts.
It just
Only because you now, like, it's something that you recognize that you do.
it comes out every now and then. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I just said that made it whistle, but I got a little whistle when I talk now. I don't know. Maybe it's character. So yeah, like to me, there's a way to do ballpark pricing right, and there's a way that it can really help you and it can help your clients, but there's a way that it really can screw you and really can shoot you in the foot. So, like, what ways can ballpark pricing go wrong?
Well, I think first off, I think one of the things that people, when like clients are asking for ballpark pricing, they immediately get defensive in the sense like, oh, they're just price shopping.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's always the case. Plenty of clients are going to price shop, right? Like they're just looking for the best number. But your ideal client is probably asking that specifically to understand, just find alignment. And then, say say you're really expensive and they've talked to a couple builders, which, guys, I want to be very straightforward with it. I think every client should talk to multiple builders. Like they need to understand how people work. I'm not saying that they need to price with multiple builders or bid with multiple builders, but I think it's important to encourage someone to, hey, you should talk to one or two builders if you're unsure who you want to work with, because it's important to understand how people do things differently. Now, this is going to put the pressure on you to deliver what the client wants and in a way that they want to go through this process. And I think that's important. Like there should be a pressure on you to deliver a great client experience. And that's going to be that is kind of that competitive landscape. But when they're getting that ballpark, it's just finding alignment, and, there's a lot of ways to do that. Obviously, like I think the most common one that you'll hear kind of pros and cons to both is square foot pricing.
Yeah.
And I rattled off $1,000 a square foot a couple minutes ago. That can also, shoot you in the foot. I think it has to do with delivery. It's a matter of like, are you saying that, hey, their project's going to be $1,000 a square foot? It's like, well, you know nothing about that project. But if I'm saying, hey, our projects in general average around $1,000 a square foot, or our projects have a minimum threshold of at least $1,000 a square foot, what that should communicate, and ultimately what I'm trying to communicate in that moment is, hey, our projects are going to cost at least $1,000 a square foot. So when you're reaching out to us, that is our minimum threshold. I know nothing about your project, but I can tell you if you're working with us, it's not going to be less than $1,000 a foot. And make sure that we have that alignment going into it, because they might say, well, I'm really hoping to be, say we're talking about the average. Well, I'm really hoping to be $800 a square foot. It's like, okay, well, if our average is 1,000, like that doesn't mean we can't hit 800. What that means is we need to develop an $800 a square foot project. And I can't tell you what your project's going to be until we develop or design, within that. And that leads to obviously the pre-construction conversation.
And I also think the entire premise of square foot pricing depends on the parameters of your typical project. So you have to understand that. So for me, it's like if somebody wants I don't do square foot pricing just because with a house, it can make sense. And I think it can get you that baseline that you're looking for. But if you're doing a small addition, you're doing a renovation, square foot sometimes goes out the window. But you have to understand the parameters of what makes up that square foot cost for you and your business to be able to throw that out. Like you said, if it's $1,000 a square foot, why? It's based on the size. It's based on being connected to city water and city sewer. It's based on typical amount of work that you're doing for the lot size. So if clients can understand what's making that up, you're not going to trap yourself to that number when they're like, well, we're looking to build a 500 square foot house, and now your $1,000 square foot goes out the window. So you have to understand that you need to educate them on what's making up that $1,000 per square foot typical cost, what's driving those numbers, so that you're not pigeonholing yourself into a corner, and your clients actually are set up with realistic expectations of what that job's going to cost. So guessing and just throwing numbers at the wall are going to get you in trouble. And whether it's a square footage cost without the correct information, whether it's, hey, we built a house that was this size before a similar job, or this is just what my gut is telling me right now, you have to make sure that your guess is an actual educated guess and not just throwing shit out there, because you're not, the time that you're saving up front by just throwing something out there is going to bite you on the back end if that job comes to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, like the past job experience is a good one, because typically what I'm going to do is I'm going to frame the conversation around like, hey, here's a project we built, and yes, this one was $800 a square foot for this project. I am not saying that your project is anything like this project, and immediately communicating like, hey, that has different site conditions. There's different, like, I don't know what your selection process is going to be. And, have we actually fully designed the project? Do we understand the entirety of the scope? Right now, like, I can look back and say, yeah, that house was built 2 years ago. We were, this much, all in on that project. So it gives you a baseline to understand, what that project might cost. But you have to, but it's important for me to communicate like, this has nothing to do with your job. And the only way for us to get really accurate is obviously to work through it together. But we need to, you need to answer ultimately what the client is asking, right? Like, they want to know, is this in the realm of where I want to be? Let me back up, because I shared this email. We talked about this podcast a bit. I mean, I'm sorry. We talked about this project on the podcast a bit, but thinking about a project we priced a couple months ago at this point, they reach out, they want to build this awesome house, and I opted to, we based I'm gonna walk you through all my mistakes, and I'm also gonna walk you through how like this all benefited me in the end. Ultimately, they came to me. They were looking at this project and they said, "What do you think this is going to cost?" All I've seen is renderings and where the project is. So I said, there's a range here, but I'm going to guess that this is probably somewhere between $800 and $1,000 a square foot for this particular project. So it's a pretty decent range. Like, it's a 200 square. I felt comfortable because I've priced enough of these projects to know that it should end up somewhere in that range. Their response was, well, I'm hoping to be on the lower end of that. And I said, well, the only way to figure that out is to go through the pricing exercise and, and really, get some accurate numbers put together. We go through this exercise. I end up actually closer to the lower end. The mistake, and this is what I think, is the problem with square foot pricing, is that the square footage, he had a different understanding of what square footage was. He was like, I thought this was a 4,000 square foot house. I'm like, 4,000 square feet? you're like 5,800 square feet. He's like,
Way off.
I was like, I'm like, that, you have a garage, you have a basement in the garage, you have outdoor deck space. He's like, why is all of that included? I'm like, dude, I'll divide the number by any square footage you want. You want me to only divide it by the conditions?
Living space.
Yeah. The living space. That's fine. Now I'm $1,000 a foot.
Yeah.
It like, this is so going back to a point you made earlier is when you're talking about a square foot number or a total all-in cost in communicating to a client what this might be, they have to understand what that means. Because, oh yeah, we're $1,000 a foot. Okay, great. Like, I want to build a 4,000 square foot home. Yeah, but you also want 2,000 square feet of outdoor living space, and you have an unfinished basement that still costs money, and you have a 6-car garage that, sure, it's unheated, but it's still, a garage that needs to be built. So your 4,000 square foot home is really like 7,000 square feet.
Yeah.
And this is like the whole part of educating a client. And you can do this in the moment. You can obviously do this by having good copy and content and things like that, and giving the client something to bite into. And this is where, for us, my goal for what we've kind of dubbed the client journey is to be able to communicate not only our process, but how do we get to that first realistic price as quickly as possible. And, number one, it's kind of setting the expectation of like, hey, our job minimums are $3 million and up. We're typically $1,000 a square foot. What is square foot? Like, what does that square foot mean? It means total construction square footage, excludes land, excludes design. Like, that's another thing. They're like, does that include land and design? I'm like, I don't buy land.
Yeah.
Like that. So that's just construction. I'm like, just construction. What about design? Nope. Consultants? Nope. This is not even landscape.
Yeah.
And they're like, not landscape. I'm like, no, I don't know what your landscape. Like, this is you give me a raw site and I build you a house.
Yeah.
So it's again, like, really getting them to understand this as quickly as possible to ultimately help them build within their means. Because otherwise, the whole bait and switch issue, where it's like, you tell them it's $1,000 a foot, and then they start the project and it's like, here's, oh yeah, we're pricing it. It's like, all right, you got $1.5 million in landscape. It's like, that wasn't included. No, that wasn't included. If they, you knew going into it, like, you were talking about square footage as the building, but the client doesn't. And I think this is where a lot of guys just screw up. It's like, they whether it's purposeful or not, like, they will not, they put the number out there that makes sense to get the job, and then allow everything else to fall behind it as, like, kind of like a gun to your head decision. It's like, yeah, you designed $1.5 million worth of landscape. Like, you got to do it. Now your quote unquote square footage cost is $1,200 a foot.
Well, and I think that's what it comes down to, right? That your ballpark numbers that you're going to be throwing out there for these clients, these potential customers, are creating an anchor point for you psychologically for that entire job, whether you know it or not. So you have to be very careful when throwing those first and those preliminary numbers out there, because your clients are going to feel like that emotionally, they're going to hang on to that number, whether you like it or not, they're going to. So you're doing yourself an extreme disservice by not explaining what's included, what's not included, and giving yourself a realistic ballpark to work with. Because we're going to see this, right? For example, we're going to throw a number out there. This job's going to be $200,000. And then they sign up, you do pre-construction, the job's $260,000. You understand logically that scope changed from what your preliminary ballpark pricing was, but clients don't understand that. They don't want to see that. So now they just see that, like you said, the old bait and switch, right? It's $60,000 more. They signed us up for pre-con. If they don't understand what's driving the cost of that and why it went from 200 to 260, And if you improperly anchored them on that $200,000 and didn't set realistic expectation, that's going to be a huge issue moving forward. And the job may not actually happen because they've now lost trust in you.
Mhm.
So you have to understand what's important to this client, what you can actually do for the cost of that, and not sign up for pre-construction. And it happens, but not sign up for pre-construction, not get in bed with the client, not anchor the entire job on a undefined or ill-defined expectation of that project, from the price to the scope to the level of finish and everything else. Like ballpark pricing, those initial anchor numbers are extremely powerful when you understand what makes them up. And my project that I just wrapped up, that porch, initially the client came to me and was like, "Hey, how much is this going to be?" And I gave them a price just off the top of my head, like, "Hey, here's what a normal deck would be. Here's throwing a roof on top of it." That was probably half the cost of what she wound up spending. As I was like, we can go through this design, as she started designing this job and working with an architect to pick finishes, everything else, it turned into more than just a deck with a roof on top of it. And explained to her what the costs were, what were driving the cost, where we could potentially cut the cost. And she wound up choosing a job and a level of finish that was basically 2x. We added other stuff in, there was additional scope, but all of that was spelled out completely and clearly throughout that process. And the trust was there for her to understand that that initial number and what it included was not what we actually contracted, on that project, right? So if I weren't to have done a good job of explaining what that budget was when it was roughly half of what she wound up spending, and she had the idea that she was going to get what she got for that price, I possibly could have shot myself in the foot. But I was very clear on what that included and what it did not include. And then the conversation was, "Hey, if you really want to go through with this, we can start designing this." And we did multiple designs. We changed the size of it. We changed the scope. We changed the finishes. And throughout that process, we discussed the financial implications of every decision that was made. And so when she signed a contract for basically 2x that, like, she's fully on board with that and okay with that, because we walked her through that process and we educated on that process, and we were open and transparent and honest with her throughout that process. So it wound up being a very successful job that we wound up being on budget for. I would argue to say that we were under budget because we changed a bunch of the finish scope throughout the job. And we nailed the budget, we nailed the design, we nailed the execution, and from the beginning until project closeout was successful financially because of our process in doing that and understanding what those ballpark numbers need to look like.
Here's a hot take. The reason that you're, not you, Tyler, but like someone that might be listening, the reason that you're not making money or having a hard time running your business is because that process that Tyler just outlined, you don't even have. And because the speed in which you communicate to a client, like Tyler's saying, 2x the budget on a rear deck project, if the client, if you give this ballpark number and then let that thing evolve and eventually get to the point where it's like, oh, it is 2x, you're going to have a disgruntled client. They're not going to be happy with the fact that, oh, I didn't know I was designing something more expensive. And you might say, how could you not know? They don't, guys, these clients don't know. And it's not because they're stupid. It's not that they're stupid. It's just simply like this, you are the professional. They are leaning on you to be the professional in this and communicate. So as things are changing, it's as if you need to have real live data pricing in front of them. It's like, I want to do this. Yep, $50. Oh, actually, never mind. Okay, back down to zero. It's like, what if we do this? $210. Okay, never mind. Bring it back down to zero. Like that is almost the speed in which you need to be communicating this to a client, because you have to understand they do not have any understanding of, or at least you should assume that they have no understanding of what this stuff costs, because it's either you're either going to lose money or you are going to lose a referral. One of the other. It doesn't, like, there's no other way that plays out. If your process sucks, like, you lose one of them or both of them.
I mean, for me, what happened early on before I really understood how to approach this entire pre-construction, rough budgeting, wags, swags, all that stuff, is that I was locking myself and anchoring myself to a number that I was going to make at that point, then work on design, get the job together, and then I was going to anchor myself to that number, and I was going to over execute and lose so much money on those projects because I just thought this initial number I threw out there based on parameters that I didn't have was going to be accurate. So like for years, I cost myself so much time, money, not paying myself, paying employees, paying subcontractors to execute jobs because I locked myself into a number without having a defined scope and without going through this process properly. So I have a couple of ways that we use ranges to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. So the one thing is defining and clearly communicating to your client the variables on the potential job that they're looking at, right? What drives the number? Rather than just focusing on the number, say it's a kitchen renovation, what's going to drive the number? There's a few things, right? It's going to be level of finish, what type of cabinetry they want. That's a big part of the budget. It could be a third of the budget, a quarter of the budget. Also, are you changing the layout of the existing kitchen? If we're having to redo all the utilities and move gas lines and move water lines and everything else, that's obviously going to drive the scope. If it's a partial renovation, if it's a full gut, all of these things are going to drive the price, and educating your clients on what's actually driving the price of a kitchen renovation, what's driving the price of a new house build. Again, somebody buys land. Are you on city water? Are you on septic? Do you need to get utilities to the site? Has it been developed before? Are you tearing something down and then building new on an existing lot? All of these are massive drivers for price, and focus on that so that your client understands what's driving the cost of that budget, rather than just saying, hey, you're going to be in the $150,000 range. Well, maybe that is your number, but you explain to them, hey, you're going to be in the $150,000 range, or 150 to 200. Here's what's driving that price, and here's what could potentially drive that price out of the water. So that's a tool that I use for my clients so that they understand what actually makes that job cost what it does, and where we can go off the rails very quickly.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. The guys that are just getting into this business, like, how do I get to that 150, 200 number? Or even the guys that have been in business, like, still might struggle with, like, how do I even feel confident saying 150 to 200? And this is really coming back to the more you're pricing and doing work, like, this is where you know the opportunity lies in the information that you've put together. Like, you can price a job and not get the job, use that data. You can price a job, do the job, make money. Now you have even more accurate data, or lose money. You still have accurate data because you have your job cost. The more information that you track, the more you'll understand it. But I think for us, what we look at is we kind of divide this up when we're trying to put together a rough ballpark. Very rarely am I going to be having a conversation like immediately saying, oh yeah, that's probably a $3 to $3.5 million house. Like that, like, we need more information. But I can also refer back to my information where it's like, let me go look at a similar house and see what that cost. And yes, high level, it could be square footage, but then we break it down and we do some comparison across a handful of projects where it's like, all right, well, typically, we're spending this percentage of the budget on electrical. Typically, we're spending this much money on countertops. And we'll just continue to break this down so we have all of these kind of levers that we can pull. So when we're asking the question where it's like, hey, do you know if it's on septic or sewer? It's like, all right, well, we know septic's going to be, about double the sewer cost. 15 grand for sewer, it's about 30,000 for septic. Not knowing what the septic system is, but just a standard septic system. And
That's the first realistic number I feel like I've ever heard you throw out on a podcast before, or what seems low to me. It's the first time I've ever heard you have any sort of budget that seemed low.
Thanks. I'm trying to be more relatable, Tyler. But my point is, the more, this is really what we're trying to build in the background is, how do we build this thing so when we're at a point where someone just wants to understand, like, is this even feasible, that we can give them as accurate of information as possible, knowing which levers to pull and adjust.
And like with regard to that, there's something to be said for inaccuracy with this budget, right? Where it's like, if you truly don't know and there's not enough information, do not give them a number that's going to lock you in and set you up for failure, right? Give a decent range. And that range can be a larger range, right? We have here 110,000 to 180,000, depending on selections and scope. If you don't have the information to define or whittle that range down, then don't. Like, give yourself a range that protects you. Give yourself a range that allows the client to drive the cost of that job. And again, if you're using all of those variables and educating them on what drives that, there's nothing wrong with giving that range. To me, it leads to the conversation of why you should be signing up for us for pre-construction, right? Where it's like, hey, we've done these projects that have been 100,000. We've done these projects that have been 300,000 in a similar house to yours and a similar size renovation. It really comes down to what you want, what your needs are. So in order to really define what's this job's going to cost you, we have to take the next steps. We need more information. We need to invest more time in this. I can execute this job anywhere in between those numbers, but I can't do that without more information right now. So for me, that's the segue into signing the job prior to having the job, getting that client to sign up for a pre-construction, getting paid to plan this project and budget this job. And at that point, as long as I know that my range is accurate and that I can make the money that I need to, I can build that job out on paper to meet that budget. I just need to make sure that the $100,000 job is a completely different job than the $300,000 job. I don't want to make less just because it's $100,000, and I don't necessarily want to make more just because it's $300,000. I want to make the same amount of money based on the time and the liability and the exposure and the risk that I have there and the costs of those projects. I need to build them out wherever that budget works for that client to make sure that I'm protecting myself and still making the same amount of money, whether it's a $100,000 job or a $300,000 job. If that makes sense to you, I'm not saying that I'm not going to make more on a $300,000 job. It's a bigger job. Relatively speaking, yes. If it takes more time, then yes, I want to make more money. If there's more risk and I'm dealing with a higher end product that there's risk and there's liability there, I want to make more money. But I don't want to say, oh yeah, they're spending less, so now I'm just going to make less money. No, that's not how it works. I want that budget to make sure that I'm protecting, I'm making the same amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, there's a delicate balance to over guesstimating too. But I will say that more often than not, when I've been in a position where I've thrown out a number that I knew was high, what that has allowed me to do is get a good reaction to what their goals were. Like we actually just shared something the other day where, there was no scope, like zero scope has been defined. They just want to do, a first floor renovation, potentially an addition. And they were like, we want to spend $1 million. And we have put together, high level square footage numbers. And I'm like, dude, I don't know, like that could be $2 million. we haven't even defined what we're doing within this space yet. Like literally, like, is there structural changes? Are we changing mechanicals, or is this simply just interior finishes? And what level of interior finish? So we had just thrown out like, hey, this could be $2 million. And they were like, oh my God, no, like that's a non-starter for us. Like we need this to be like $1.5 million max. Okay, great. Like let's use that and define what the project is from there, rather than design what you want and find out that you've spent $2 million. And I think this is really the catalyst to the success of a project, where it's when you're involved early, you have to define what is important to them. And in this case, what's important to them is, I mean, they want high quality. They have a schedule that they need to meet, and they have a defined budget. And it's like, this is why I hate the whole like, well, you can't have all three. It's like, I disagree. Like, you just have to prioritize what's important.
Yeah.
And, so they've defined the budget. So let's make sure that we're building a high quality product in the time frame that's possible. And then whatever we're doing fits within that $1.5 million budget. That's it. Like, that's what you do. That's what you have to focus on, is work backwards from what the parameters have been set by the client. And now you can define the project that fits that. And you're in control.
And also, like, what's so important that I screwed up, and I do want to make a note of this, is making sure that this project fits your needs as a business. And I know I've spoken about this at the Coalition Summit, but it was a smaller repair job for a plumber that I work with. And I knew that the cost of this repair was expensive, but I also knew what it entailed and the risk and the potential of time and money that I can eat. So I created a budget for this client, and I sent it to her, and I explained to her, hey, I'm not creating this budget. I'm not giving you this budget to sell you this job, and this being this extremely desirable budget that's just like, yeah, let's sign up now for it. No, I'm not doing that. I'm creating a budget that's comprehensive. I'm creating a budget that's realistic, and a budget that's going to protect you and me in case the potential issues that I foresee we actually end up experiencing and running into. And I think that when you can come out front and you can be open and you can be honest with clients, sure, there's some people that are going to see your number and just walk. But for the clients that really want to trust somebody and want to make sure that you're doing right by them, having this conversation of, hey, I know that this number looks big, but the reason that I'm doing this is to make sure that we are covered for whatever we run into. If we don't run into those issues, yeah, the job's going to be less than that. I'm not going to charge you for hypotheticals, but I don't want to just give you this number where your eyes get big and you're like, let's sign up for it. And then we start the project and then I add 40% to it. Like, to me, that's not fair. That's not a success. That client's more than likely not going to want to use you again. You're not going to get the referrals. But if I can land that job up front by having that 40% on top, and then I can come in 20% under, even when we ran into things that were somewhat unanticipated, that's a win for me. That's a win for that client. We came in under the budget that I set forth from the outset. And also, there were extras that we ran into that I got covered and I got paid for. And to me, it, like, when you are doing these things, you have to make sure that you're setting yourself up with a realistic number for the expectations that were set forth.
Yeah, I think, obviously one of the challenges that comes up a lot is this whole the whole competition of competing, not necessarily just on price, but just with other builders, other contractors, that might be, have a long-standing reputation. The issue is that so many people will prioritize getting the job and then change ordering it after. And it's, and a lot of clients just deal with that and accept that is a way of the business and will negotiate accordingly. There's many unfortunate parts to that because what you're describing is being more upfront and setting the expectation early rather than trying to just simply land the job. And I mean, anyone listening to this, like myself included, there's been times where we've, you know, we had a client that we put together a conservative budget. They came back, said, hey, we really need to be at this number. So I said, we can develop a budget to hit that number. We do. Here it is. And then we get into the project and they're like, well, I want to use this. I'm like, we don't have the budget for that. So, well, what did you assume? It's like a lesser expensive interior door package. It's like you can definitely buy an interior door package for what we budgeted. It's just not what you want. And so, and my team, my team pushes back on me. It's like, Nick, you've developed this unrealistic budget. It's like, no, we had a realistic budget. They wanted the project to come in less. We defined what that project would have to be in order to hit that number, but they don't want to hit that number. And so fast forward, we have another project that's in pricing right now that I'm going through, and they're like, it's really important that we hit our budget. So I'm working through this. It's like multiple buildings, pretty extensive site work, and I'm trying to hit their number, and it's just not happening. So I'm looking at it. I'm like, all right, I can't. I've already exhausted the idea of how do we do this faster? How do we do this more efficiently? Are there different materials that we can use? And no, everything is designed, and what is designed is the more economical option. So how do we get this budget to work? Okay, you need to remove things.
Yeah.
You need to get rid of things or not do something in order for this project to move forward under the budget that you're looking for. So what we did is we ultimately created a budget that separated every building, every major scope of work that could be done separately into different columns. So, hey, this building is this much money. This building is this much money. Site work, you have to do it regardless. So let's just say this has to be done. Additional landscape, this is the landscape that you need to do for site drainage. Here's the landscape that you could defer to later on. Now they look at it and be like, all right, if I just take this out, I can hit my budget. Yeah, just don't do that. And because I think forever I would just sit there and we use the word noodle a lot, noodle on this and try to find a way to hit their budget, or do what I did on the prior project is develop a budget that does hit develop a budget that is at their number that they want to be, but it's a scope that they are not going to be happy with.
Yeah. And that's like the whole anchor point of throwing out those ballparks that you have to be really careful of. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of it comes down to confidence and business confidence and confidence in your numbers and understanding when you're making money on a job and when you're not making money on a job. And it wasn't until I really understood my costs of every single day and every hour that I put into business and really did a deep dive on my numbers that I was confident in giving people ballparks that weren't inexpensive, right? Where it's not that sweetheart pricing that they're looking to sign up right away and then I could change order them. When I really understood the cost of me being on a job and the work that we put in place, I was way more confident in those ballparks and setting realistic ballparks and anchoring myself to a number that I can execute on during the pre-con stage. So how am I using ballparks and back of napkin numbers, wags, swags, whatever, to segue into pre-con and developing a more comprehensive scope, a schedule, everything that we include in our pre-con process. For me, I'm just going to be doing that now. I have another client that's a return client that I feel like anytime you do a job, then everyone else wants that job. So somebody else wants another, they want a front porch done. So what this process is going to look like for me is the existing client reached out to me. Hey, this is what we want done. Okay, I'm going to give them a ballpark of what I think this is going to cost. I'm going to ask them for some inspiration, some photos, rough sizes, and I'm going to throw a number at them that I think makes sense for me. And then I'm going to explain to them, this is based on these parameters. This is what it includes. This is what it may not include. But I really cannot guarantee this number until we get a design in place and until I have the time and the resources to do my due diligence and price this job accurately. I need to get subcontractors out. We need to choose finishes. I need to understand what needs to happen with zoning, what the design process looks like. Every aspect of this job needs to be nailed down before I can actually define what this job's going to cost. If you want to do that, here's the cost it's going to take. Here's the architect that you need to get a hold of. We need to get a design in place. That's going to cost roughly this much money for the architect. And then we can start pricing this out and we can adjust finishes depending on what your budget is. But until then, I'm really just guessing at what this costs. So that's how my process looks like, and it's going to segue into pre-con, where it's, here's the number, here's the anchor. I'm going to make sure that that anchor protects me for whatever scope I discuss at that point. I could anchor that to a scope that's less comprehensive or less detailed, or I could anchor that to a scope that I know this client and I know that she wants everything top of the line. I need to anchor that to whatever's realistic for this client and what I believe they want, what their needs are at this point. So I've gathered all that information. I'm going to anchor myself to a number that I feel is realistic for their program. We're going to get the design going, work on it with the architect, begin strategically budgeting that, get a pre-construction in place, and then we're going to build that entire project out. We're going to have the architect finish design. We're going to get all our subs there. We're going to pick finishes, and we'll build that project on paper from a scope, from a schedule, and from a design perspective to make sure that, hey, this is what we wanted to spend, and this is what we're getting. No, that's too much. Okay, well, then we can reduce this finish to a different option that's going to save you 15%. We can get rid of this aspect of the job. You can get rid of the hip roof and go to a shed roof. Whatever I need to do to make sure that I'm making the money that I need to. I'm not just going to put a hip roof on because that's what they want, but they can't afford it, right? If you can't afford it, then you can put a shed roof on. That's what your budget allows. And that's how I'm walking myself from that initial inquiry through napkin numbers, through bringing a designer in, through my pre-construction, and then through my final budgeting.
Yeah, it's going back to something you said earlier. It's like the confidence is a huge part of this. And I think the more time you spend really understanding what goes into the work and how much the work actually costs, the more confident you're going to have. And I think it's not just the projects that you end up building or actually doing or actually making money on. It's any opportunity that you get to sit down and pencil out a project. Sure, the further along, like if you build a house or renovate a space and actually go through it and track all that, like that's your most accurate information. But just get the reps in. Like you have to spend the time and understand this. And this is why I think that, pre-construction is how we go through every one of our projects. It's a requirement. Like we have to do it. And I'll just make a note, because this actually came up in a meeting internally, is that, Nick, you promote pre-construction like through all your social, like the podcast, so much. And that doesn't always match the way that it's actually happening in the background. And I was like, listen, I'm actually keenly aware of that. I'm promoting like best practice. Many of our clients want to go through pre-con. They're sold on it because of what we outline, but there's this moment during pre-construction that they're like, let's just get started.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but we're not done yet. They're like, that's okay. We're close enough. And the conversation was like, you know what, you're right. Like we never on this particular project, we never ended up getting any more information. The design was never resolved, where they were like, let's start construction. We'll continue to work on design in the background. And I said, maybe we need to do a better job just raising our hand and saying, hey, we're fine with that. But just a reminder, we're only, 50% of the way through pre-construction here, and we're pivoting. But going back, this is why I think that, yes, we'll go through pre-construction, but early on, or when you're looking to break into different markets, or even for us, like when we're approached with opportunities that might be, enticing enough where I'll put the rep in and say, you know what, I'll sit down and I'll put together our quote unquote ballpark pricing, which is more like a tier one budget. Meaning like there's information there, and I can put real numbers to it, and I can define the scope from division 1 to division 16 and say, this is how I see the project being broken down, and here's how these are the assumptions that I've made. I'm assuming that you're doing, heat pump, Mitsubishi heat pump system with an ERV and whatever it is. Like, I'm defining that scope and giving them a tier 1 really thorough budget. And that is just my human decision to say, I'm going to invest the time because this seems like a viable project for us. And, and right now they're so unsure about this process and whether or not that they can even do the project. Going back to the project I mentioned earlier, where they thought it was 1 square footage and it was another. That's how that played out. I put a tier 1 budget together. It took me 16 hours to put together, but it gave them the information that they needed. Ultimately, the information was, this is too expensive, we're not building it. And, on one hand, that can feel like a big waste of time, but I basically, I pocketed that rep and said, now I've done it. I have more information on projects that fit that criteria, only for me to get an inquiry the next day saying, hey, we're looking to build this house. It's in this area. And I look at them like, that's literally the same project I just priced. So
now same person trying to dupe you.
It's like, hey, yeah. But now I have now I have the rep. So when he hops on a phone call with me, he's like, what do you think? Like, what do you think from a ballpark perspective? I'm like, well, interestingly, I have a project that we've already priced. Very, very similar. The site conditions are similar. This is the range. And I didn't tell him it was, $4.7 million. I said that project, it was between $4.5 $5 million. And he's like, okay, that's aligned with my expectation. I'm like, great. Like, look at that. Like, now I have confidence because I put the rep in and just, happenstance have this client calling that is now more qualified than the original guy.
There's also, I want all of you to understand that you don't have to give somebody a number immediately. And I did this early on when I lacked experience. And the exact thing I would say is, I need some time to digest this, understand what's going on, sit down and create some accurate assessments and information. And I'm not comfortable shooting from the hip. And if you explain that to them, and you explain that you don't want to emotionally anchor them to a price without really understanding what the job costs, there's nothing wrong. I don't know how many times early in my career I told people, I'm not comfortable shooting from the hip. I need some time to sit back and assess this. And if that's something that you feel that you have to do, by all means do that. You're better off doing that and not telling them what they want to hear, and then taking the time to create an accurate anchor point for this project than just saying, hey, here's a number I'm going to throw out, not really being able to analyze and quantify that job correctly. And then that's the number that you're locked into. And anything above that, that client's going to think that you're taking advantage of them. So don't hesitate to tell them, hey, I need some time to mull this over and really look and assess what this job's going to take. So if there's any takeaways or the most important takeaways for this podcast for me, that ballparks aren't necessarily bad. I know a lot of times we don't want to disclose ballparks. We don't want to work off ballparks. As long as they are educated ballparks, for me, they're not a bad thing. They can vet your clients. They can set the stage for an accurate project. They can align you with the right clients, the right design. The second thing is that first number that you're going to put out there is going to set the emotional tone for that project. So just understand that whatever is coming out of your mouth, that's what that client's going to hear, regardless of anything else that you told them. So make sure that aligns with an accurate scope.
Even when they say, don't worry, I won't hold you to this.
Exactly. So if you're giving a range, they are meant to educate your clients, not commit to that range, right? Whatever the parameters of that are, they're meant to educate your client on what the range could potentially do. They're not meant to pigeonhole yourself to one specific number. Confidence beats precision early on. We just spoke about this. If you understand your numbers and you're confident in your process and you're confident that you're giving them an accurate anchor point that you can then fulfill through pre-construction, it's going to trump giving them accuracy early on and losing the job because you took too long to do it or because you needed to dial in that number to be precise. And then pre-construction is the solution, the next step. It's not an upsell. A lot of times people, right, they think that pre-con's an upsell. It's an additional fee that you don't need. For us, everything that we've done, that's the solution to building an accurate budget, building an accurate scope, and working with designers. So typically, I've learned over the years that if you're throwing a budget out there and that client's not happy with it, it's typically not a pricing issue, right? We're not out here driving Ferraris. We're not living in $10 million homes. We are making ends meet a lot of times. So it's not a pricing issue. It's a communication issue. Your number and what you're throwing out is not meeting their expectations or the scope that they had in mind. It's not that you are price gouging them. It's not that you're taking advantage. It's not that your numbers and your markups are too high. It's just that it doesn't meet the scope or match the expectation for that client. So it comes down to being a communication issue, not necessarily a pricing issue.
Hey, to summarize, everything we do in this industry comes down to good communication. And it's why we preach, everything that we preach. It's why we talk, pre-construction is a communication tool. The client experience during construction, that's all tied back to communication. If you've been at our summit, we talk about, managing client expectations, and it is literally revolves around the idea around great communication. It's what we share in our email, our weekly Modern Craftsman emails. It's everything I'm working on in my business right now is I've basically developed this client journey from the time someone calls me and says, hey, my name is so-and-so, I'd like to build a house, all the way to when we finish building their house and then we help maintain it. Like, I've mapped that client journey out, and everything is about how we communicate with them through that process. So yeah, if you want the cliff notes, the too long didn't read, the TLDR, as the kids say. Good.
Dude, I just found out what that meant. I'm not going to lie. Like 2 weeks ago.
Okay, I probably found out maybe like 6 months ago. I was like, what is this? What does this mean? This is cool.
I had no idea.
Yeah, apparently it's very hot right now.
I'm not reading that. I ain't reading that essay.
So yeah, down to communication.
Sweet. Well, if you guys want to find out more about everything that we're doing, what's the best way to do that?
Dude, moderncraftsman.co, not .com. Moderncraftsman.co. Sign up for the newsletter. It's where you get all the behind the scenes stuff. It's where we share our processes. It's where we share some, what's going on in my business and Tyler's business and the documents. And of course, everything that we're building to help you guys, educate you guys, is in that email list. So when we're launching new educational content, it's in those emails. That's where you're going to get the exclusive access and, of course, the best rates.
All right, guys and girls. Yeah, thank you. Happy New Year. Let's crush this 2026.
Happy birthday, Tyler.
Thanks, man. 40.